Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Wine Communicators' first webinar for 2023. And I guess for those romantics out there, a very happy Valentine's Day being the 14th of February. As many of you know, my name is Prue Klein, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator here at Wine Communicators of Australia. To start the year off, we have the team from CGA presenting today. Welcome, James Phillips. James is the Client Solutions Director, Australia and New Zealand, and Tom. Hi, Tom. Tom Graham, Client Success Leader, Australia and New Zealand. Together today, they'll be delving into CGA's by NielsenIQ's consumer research and sales tracking data, exploring the Australian on-premise themes of recovery from COVID-19, value in the on-premise, market overview for still wine, health and well-being, and local wine. So there's lots of topics to be covered in the next hour. We've allowed plenty of time for any questions you may have for the team to be answered at the end of the webinar. However, as your questions come to mind, please type them in via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Today's webinar will be recorded and a link to the recording will be sent to you 24 hours post-event, should you wish to watch it again at a later time. It is now my pleasure to hand over to James, who's kicking off today's presentation. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Prue, and for such a warm introduction as well. As she mentioned, my name's James Phillips. I'm from CGA by NielsenIQ, and today we're looking to take you through Australian on-premise trends and wine deep dive, but also in the context of what's happening globally as well in the on-premise. So as Prue mentioned, my name's James, and we've got Tom here today who leads our client success team in Australia and New Zealand to present to you today. CGA by NielsenIQ are the global leaders in on-premise data, consumer research and market measurement. And we're here today through our relationship with Wine Australia and that partnership that we have, who support us in providing, I guess, the best quality insights in the wine industry from an on-premise perspective. As Prue mentioned, please feel free to put some questions in the Q&A and we'll get to answering those at the end of the presentation. So in terms of our data sources that we use at CGA, we use a variety of different consumer and sales data to be able to come up with, I guess, a comprehensive view of what's happening in the on-premise. And today, as part of our presentation, we'll utilize bartender research, outlet index, which is our measurement or our licensed database of on-premise venues that allows us to create a size and shape of the on-premise. Our global study reach, which is a survey of over 25,000 consumers across 27 different markets that allows us to give that global view on what's happening in the on-premise. Beverage Track, which is super exciting. It's our new sales data product that allows us for the first time in Australia to track what's happening in the on-premise channel across outlets in Australia. And finally, our core syndicated product from consumer research perspective, Opus, which looks at 4,000 on-premise consumers across Australia. So what we've got for you today is firstly a return of the on-premise around the world post-COVID. We'll then dive into premiumization or polarization, what is happening from a value perspective. Tom will then take over and take you through a bit of a wine overview, no, low and other emerging categories. And then finally, the desire for local as well, where I'll pick up towards the end. And then we've got some recommendations and key takeaways for suppliers and how you can maximize this in the on-premise as well. So return of the on-premise around the world. So firstly, I'd probably just start with globally, why is this channel so important? Firstly, from a global perspective, consumption and penetration is a big proportion of consumers' drinking habits globally. So 40% of their total alcohol consumption globally is in the on-premise. Australia might under-index slightly to that level as we have such a large in-home consumption, but it still gives you an idea of the opportunity out there from an on-premise perspective. The second piece is it's a really strong emotional relationships that consumers form with brands and categories in the on-premise, with 3 in 5 of on-premise consumers saying they've their experiences that they've had in this channel have prompted them to purchase a drink in the off-trade. So the brand experience they get, that rich experience with family and friends, really transfers to their loyalty and advocacy throughout the trade. And finally, it's a place for trial, trade up and exploration as well. 36% of consumers globally try new drinks in the on-premise compared to 31% who stick with what they know. So there's more people there looking for something new and innovative. And finally, they're willing to pay more for better quality drinks in the on-premise as well. So there's a real opportunity also for brands to trade people up into more premium offerings in the on-premise. Globally, 84% of consumers typically visit the on-premise, and last year we saw that increase by 3 percentage points on the year prior. That's a bit of an increase, but it's across a broad time span. So it's good to see people going back into the on-premise after COVID as well. And in terms of, around the globe, what are the sort of occasions and the motivations for people, or the need states for why they go into venues? And we sort of break it down into two areas: food-led and drink-led. And it's really positive to see in 2022 there was a big jump back in, particularly those drink-led occasions in the on-premise, where during COVID a lot of these have been transferred back to home. And also additionally, food-led, the frequency is still sort of there or thereabouts for what it was pre-COVID. So in general, it's a really positive view globally on the frequency of visitation back into the on-premise. But the market has changed from an on-premise channel perspective. There's been a significant reduction over the time of COVID of venues in the on-premise, and these examples from the US, Great Britain, and France really demonstrate that changing nature of the size of the on-premise, with a big 14,000 venues closing in the US, 10,000 in France, and 9,000 in Great Britain. So the total universe has really contracted, and it's made it a lot more difficult for suppliers to compete in that space. But there's still, I guess, opportunity to really win and beat out your competitors within this space with really great strategies. But additionally, the disruptions coming in the form of changes from a winery perspective. We even see locally a lot of vertical integration happening with Endeavour, buying wineries in Australia locally in sort of key regions like Oak Ridge in Victoria, and also more recently Cape Mentelle over in Western Australia's Margaret River. And globally, confidence was very high in 2022. With 47% of global consumers saying they plan to visit hospitalities more often than they did in 2021. So the outlook was really positive, and they were doing it for a variety of reasons. But really, we sort of break this down into a couple of key areas, and those being sort of treat and experimentation. The on-premise is traditionally a place where people can gather with friends or family to sort of treat themselves, try something new, or celebrate special occasions. And therefore, it's a really important place for brands to activate and do something different to allow people to sort of have that treat or experiment as well. And we've got a few examples here locally of how brands and wine brands are really elevating that activation to show consumers a really premium offering. So the first I'll give is the Penfolds 389 activation, the Venture Beyond campaign, which really tried to elevate this through, gifting, experiential events to sort of say to consumers that this wine is worth paying more for. Additionally, Moet & Chandon in Sydney had this effervescence campaign and festival, a consumer event that really linked in also direct to consumer digital e-retail to be able to sort of make it a sort of omni-channel experience for consumers as well. When we look up sort of more overseas as well and across, I guess, different categories, because I think it's really interesting to see what happens in things like spirits in the on-premise. Things like this Aperol activation in the UK really show how brands can elevate that activation and are coming back really strong with their activations post-COVID as well. So it's really all about the colour and the experience of people, and bang centre in the middle of London. I think it really dials up all the brand cues and equity really well for Aperol. But even more interestingly, from a metaverse perspective, but also from an omni-channel perspective, Absolute Land in Coachella 2022 really sort of blurred those sort of lines between the digital and the physical activation of brands, trying to fill the, I guess, the area where maybe their consumers are interacting more. I don't know if I ever really want to go full metaverse, but I think it's a really interesting example of how you can use the different channels to communicate with the changing consumer these days. But we also know activations at big events can drive a lot higher category sales. And this is from our latest Beverage Track sales data that shows, I guess, the interaction between weekly sales velocity during the period leading up to the AFL and NRL grand finals last year. And therefore, it can really help suppliers understand where the best timing is to activate for their brands. It's really a key beer occasion, obviously, footy, and it's something that you can see there from the actual sales coming through in the average venue across Australia. There's a massive uplift in what happens with beer, and then it sort of tapers off for wine and spirits versus sort of more normal conditions in the lead up to that. Additionally, day part preference can be a real focus for activations across different categories as well. So understanding where the moment in time where, I guess, wine drops off or beer drops off or spirit picks up across the day. And you can see as consumers move towards that early evening, there is a sort of radical shift towards drinking spirits versus those sort of midday to early evening occasions in beer and wine. And I think the most interesting thing for me with all the media sensation around different ways of working from home last year, was that actually when we looked at our data across the course of the year at different days of the week and consumption at different days of the week, Thursday being tipped to be the new Friday didn't really eventuate post-COVID. We don't actually have data going back further than this, and it'd be really interesting to see what would have happened in terms of the uplift on Thursday. But in comparison to Friday, Saturday, Sunday, to those weekend times in Australia, it isn't as big a opportunity for brands to engage with across all different categories as well. Looking now at, I guess, a consumer perspective on Australia as well, it's really great to see that penetration across the course of the year and right through into 2023 has remained elevated across both food and drink-led occasions. And I think for wine, it's really in a position to thrive considering the relationship wine has with food-led occasions. And really wine sort of over-indexes in these food-led occasions, with 52% of people saying they would generally drink wine at these occasions, and less so at the sort of drink-led occasions. So that food pairing is sort of essential when it comes to wine consumption in the on-premise. Additionally, we also saw really great penetration across most channels in 2022, and particularly the sort of casual dining and restaurant formal dining channels that we look at. So that's really positive again, I guess, for the wine growth or potential for wine growth as the channel has recovered. The one sort of downside was hotels with a venue with overnight accommodation. And the theory there for us is that a lot of people shifted their behaviour from travel from a domestic opportunity to an overseas opportunity as borders sort of opened up and people with sort of a lot of savings had the opportunity to travel again. Additionally, occasions also bounce back, so suggesting opportunities across a variety of drink categories as well. And the primary occasions that really saw the biggest uplift were these casual meals, these sort of everyday meals that people can go out and enjoy in the on-premise, but also those special occasions. And we really saw this pent-up demand for people wanting to go out and celebrate in the on-premise again. And so these are sort of places where I think consumers can find really affordable, luxury, and also a way to get together out of the home with family and friends. And therefore, we saw a really strong bounce back across the course of 2022. Despite these, I guess, penetration gains in Australia, we have seen a slight reduction in the frequency of people going out in the short run. So we're seeing sort of a larger amount of people going out less often than those that are going out more often. So I think there are a few concerns around what is happening from an inflation perspective, what is happening from an interest rate perspective in Australia, that's weighing in on people's minds around cost of living. And we'll address a bit more of that further, but it's worth considering that, you know, if you're trying to target these people out in the on-premise, the occasions that they're going to be there are becoming a bit fewer at this point in time. But I guess relative to the rest of the world, Australia is really well placed, consumers say, from how they think the cost of living increases is going to impact them, with Australia really under indexing versus across sort of saying they'd be severely impacted on these sort of changes in the cost of living. So it's a really positive outlook, I guess, from that perspective. And additionally, they say they're going to prioritise eating and drinking to a high degree versus other discretionary spends. I think during the pandemic, a lot of people did a lot of home improvement. They bought a lot of white goods, a lot of stuff that helped them sort of kit out their homes to make them comfortable for that time spent at home. And now that the on-premise is opened again across the course of 2022, people are really looking for that opportunity to make up for lost time and go out and enjoy it with family and friends. And we refer back to, I guess, those special occasions that people are using the on-premise for. And it seems to be the place that they're looking to do this. And with this, additionally, there's been an increase on average spend as well over the course of 2023. So although people are reducing the number of occasions, they're really making it a big event. And this rate of growth in terms of average spend per month on eating and drinking out has well surpassed, I guess, the inflation rate here in Australia. A lot of people may say, well, you know, inflation has been up to sort of 7% in Australia, but that increase in 13.4% between autumn and spring last year really shows that people are willing to spend more for the right occasion. And I go back again to the celebrations, really wanting to treat themselves with their family and friends. And that seems to be a big driver right now in the on-premise. Australia also remains pretty resilient in terms of the ability to spend in the on-premise moving forward. 60% of consumers feel confident they'll be able to afford to visit the on-premise as frequently in the next 12 months last year as they did before. And so that's a really positive message around the resilience that we're going to see in Australia. And finally, I think it goes back to the core of why people in Australia want to enjoy the on-premise. It's become such a core need of their behaviour. So almost 73% say they'd either be disappointed that they couldn't go out anymore if they had to sort of prioritise eating and drinking, or otherwise they'd be completely lost without it, which really shows how important to some people and their sort of sense of being consumption in the on-premise is. And, you know, further to this, we've seen a lot of data come through from the RBA recently, and also the ABS around retail sales and the performance of that. And the one shining light within that, with a lot of declines in other areas, has really been the on-premise: cafes, pubs, bars, and restaurants. So we're seeing this kind of consumer data play out to a reality in the actual retail sales value across Australia. So overall, a really positive view for what's happening in the Australian on-premise relative to the rest of the world. I'll just hand over to Tom now to take you through the sort of next section.
Thank you, James, and yeah, good afternoon all. James has done a really good summary there of the current state of the nation and consumer feelings. And now let's take it a bit further and look into what that means for your drinks brands and categories. So firstly, when we think about these current economic conditions and how people are feeling with regards to cost of living, it's really important to look at what is important when they're choosing what drinks they're ordering. Now, we see really that it is high quality and good value that consumers are really looking for. And that element of premium is actually a lot less important than you think. It isn't necessarily about a brand or product being premium. It's about the quality that it gives and the value that they're receiving from it. And that's very subjective. And that quality ladder can really change depending on the person, and the value for money can change depending on the person. But globally, we are still seeing consumers willing to trade up. So here we see 63% of global consumers are still willing to trade up. And it is really about perceiving that level of quality and value that the consumers are getting in the on-premise. However, we do also know and acknowledge that some consumers are more adversely affected by current and recent economic conditions and cost of living increases. And here we see 32% of consumers will look for more value options. So there is still that consumer set that are looking for that value end of the spectrum and must be catered to keep them engaged in the on-premise and allow them to visit the on-premise. And in Australia, more specifically, and this is the same slide that we looked at previously, but for that Australian lens, that good value is even more pertinent there. So really that value for money side of things is so key as a driver for what consumers should be drinking. So really thinking about that in brand messaging, how are consumers perceiving that value and how are brand owners really driving that messaging around the value that their brands bring in terms of consumers when they are parting with their money. And some examples here. So firstly, the Magnum, and this is an off-premise example really, but showing how brands have been able to highlight that value for money while also in a more premium space than the typical boxed wine that we have been seeing. So just showing ways to innovate in this space to add that extra value for money while also maintain that level of quality. Really nice example there. And actually, in terms of trading up, we are still seeing that, and we are still seeing that increase in Australia. So James just talked to the average spend and seeing that increase, while also the likelihood of consumers paying extra for a better quality drink. The number of consumers that say that has increased. So showing that there is really still opportunity there for trade ups. And what this means from a supplier and operator point of view is then price points must be really defined and clear, and the value that consumers are getting from trading up should be really explained and clear when operators are trying to trade consumers up to that next level of wine. It should be clear the value that the consumers are getting. And then on the flip side, when talking about the cost of living crisis, we do know that certain consumers, value for them is at the other end of the spectrum. That's super luxury premium. The average consumer, Dom Perignon and caviar is just simply not on the menu, isn't something that they look at. But for certain consumers, they perceive this as good value. Think about a really well done activation here around that Dom Perignon and caviar. Really experiential, and some consumers that is value for money. So it really shows that spectrum of value for money is large and it's about showing the consumer that they are getting that value depending on how much they're spending. And now we're going to deep dive a little bit into the wine category consumer behavior and look at what we're seeing there from the latest trends. So firstly, in terms of those drinking wine and the penetration of wine in the on-premise, and this is specific to Australia, we do see wine just below beer in terms of the number of consumers that drink it out of home. However, that has slightly increased by 2 percentage points, so eating into beer there and really showing that it is still a strong category in the on-premise and is continuing to increase that penetration. Now, from a type of wine perspective, and here we've cut sparkling versus still, there are clear differences among the type of consumers that drink each of the type of wine. So you see there that 25 to 44 age group more engaged with sparkling than the other age groups. While when we look at that over 55s, that's still right. Wine is really dominant. And then again, with your female male split, there are differences there. So what it really shows is understanding who your target demographic is in the on-premise is key to really targeting the right consumers. And we go back to the channel and the occasion dynamics that James talked about, and understanding which demographics are likely to visit which occasion and which channel can really help with targeting for specific brands and categories within wine. And from a consumer perspective, it's also important to understand who that consumer is. And here we've got just the average wine drinker versus the average on-premise visitor. And as you expect, that wine drinker is older than the average consumer, slightly higher household income, slightly more likely to be female, and the average spend is high. So what our Opus can do is really highlight who them demographics are and help with that brand positioning and targeting again in the on-premise from that consumer specific perspective. And then when we look at varietals, there are then two really most popular varietals, that's Sauvignon Blanc in the white space and then Shiraz in the red space. But you also see a number of other varietals that are popular with consumers in the on-premise. So showing there is opportunity out there with consumers having a wide portfolio of varietals to really target specific varietal drinkers as well. And we know from research that we've done over the years that different varietal drinkers will have slightly different behaviors and preferences when it comes to drinking wine in the on-premise. So another way to target is through that varietal lens, as we know consumers do select what they're drinking based on the varietal. And just to wrap up the wine section here and the insights we're talking to on wine, going further into that occasion piece and actually looking at, well, which occasions do wine drinkers typically drink wine? And what really stands out here is it's them more casual drinks occasions. So either your casual meal, relaxed, quiet drink with friends, or after work drinks that we're seeing that increase in engagement. And the after work drinks one's really interesting because that's really a beer dominated occasion typically. And what we have seen is that the number of consumers drinking beer after work drinks has actually dropped, while we're seeing things like wine and also cocktails seeing that increase. So showing that differing opportunities present themselves as we dive further into the data for wine, and it isn't just them specifically them formal meals and special occasions that are typically the big wine occasions that offer them opportunities in the on-premise. So that's from a consumer perspective, but it's also important to look at staff in the on-premise and how staff play a crucial role in that overall on-premise experience. So firstly, it's really important to look at what is important for bartenders, bar managers, bar owners to having a good relationship with a drink supplier. And typically it's things like, quality of products, competitive prices, innovative products, all around the product. But actually, one of the key things that stands out for us is that bar staff training, that perfect serve training. And that's really how suppliers can elevate that relationship with operators and really provide that additional level of training and serve training. And we think around wine, it's all about that understanding of the varietals, of the flavor palettes and how that pairs with food to create that then has a knock-on effect with the customer having that greater experience because the bartender or the waiter or the sommelier is more knowledgeable about the overall wine and the offering that they're getting. And when we talk about staff, it's really important to acknowledge the challenges currently faced in hospitality and specifically in the on-premise when it comes to staffing. We know there's a massive lack of staff in the on-premise, and it's a real challenge for operators to get quality staff and well-trained staff and experienced staff. And an example here of an initiative by ABC to drive sort of applicants to their outlets and increase their staffing was the Great Casting Call. And essentially this was a couple of days at a number of different key venues that they have, offering them a $100 voucher, 2 hours training and an opportunity to work for them. And if they did get a job with them and stayed for a month, they got another $1,000. So really showing that different initiatives are there to support operators and get staff into venues. And suppliers can also support with this, with initiatives and training to help them upskill them new staff quicker and ultimately give the consumers a better experience. And looking at that operational efficiency as well from a staffing perspective and a staffing shortage perspective, we are seeing certain innovations in the wine on-premise space. So you've got things like RTDs coming in now and wine-specific ones there, but also tapped wine and the ability for tapped wine to create that additional operational efficiency. It's quicker, it stays fresher for longer, and it can also compete directly with beer and we're seeing tap cocktails as well now on that tap space. So some really neat innovation we are seeing as a counter to the staffing crisis that is currently going on. And another innovation here we are seeing, relating more to that maintaining consistency and quality with their delivery is that Coravin and keeping screw cap wine fresh for longer. It's just another neat innovation there that can really help to maintain consistent quality in the on-premise. And just taking it a little bit left field here, relating to why staff are so important and why creating that perfect serve is so important. And it does relate a little bit more to cocktails, but perfect serving wine is still important with the right glassware and the right serving vessel. So what we see here is that when looking through friends' social media, I often get ideas of where to go to eat or drink. That's 41%. Consumers often order new and exciting drinks that they see on social media. So the secondary benefits of ensuring the venue looks good and the wine and food looks good are really clear here with that word of mouth and that potential engagement opportunity as consumers share pictures of their drinks, pictures of their food online. There is that opportunity to drive them into venues and also drive them to specific drinks. And finally, just a few examples here based on that social media piece around different ways to elevate that serving vessel. And these are really cocktail examples, but you see here using them smoke and flames, bright colors, different types of glassware, and also the likes of retro serving vessels can really help to elevate it. And it is important to think about them bartenders and what they can do to really create that perfect serve and perfect experience that consumers are then more likely to go on social media and post about it, and then it will generate that secondary engagement and word of mouth.
Great, thanks, Tom. So to talk to more sort of emerging trends in Australia, we've got a piece now on low and no alcohol and the innovation we're seeing in that space. And I think there's been sort of differing experiences with no and low alternatives across the globe. There's been a lot of media hype and news updates around how big a category no-low is becoming across the world. But I think it's really interesting to see that we see a big divergence between sort of two sort of big sort of consumer groups that either are big adopters on that sort of left-hand side, people that are saying versus a year ago, I'm drinking no-low much more often than I did. But also likewise on the other side in the red is a big proportion of people saying, actually, no, I'm going to drink this less frequently than I did. I've trialed no-low alternatives and they're not for me. I much prefer drinking, I guess, the alcoholic versions of them. Somewhere like New Zealand, this is even more stark and more significant. So you can see how big that 27% of rejectors of the no-low alternatives are in that market. So it's interesting to see Australia is quite balanced, but we're starting to see sort of a two different types of consumers out there. There's been a lot of examples of really great brands coming out with no-low in Australia. I think McGuigan has been sort of one of the first movers and really strong performers in this area. But it also opens up opportunities across different channels as well, not only in the on-premise, but also we've seen this moving into sort of grocery and outside of sort of traditional liquor retailing. So it's great to see this happening. But additionally, we're also seeing rather than just moderating through no alcohol at all, there's also sort of a lighter or sort of a mid-strength that we're starting to see come through globally. So this is out of the US and from TWE, is the 19 Crimes Martha's Lighter Shard, obviously playing up on her securities fraud issues where she went to jail. But it's a really good example of how things and trends like a lighter style that we've seen a lot of in sort of beer categories is now starting to play out more and more across more mainstream wine brands as well. And a lot of brands are putting effort and money and investment into activation in the no-low space as well. So Corona released their 0.0 brand in London last year with this massive event and launch event across the Piccola Paraiso there that activation. So it just shows how important this is for suppliers and big brand suppliers globally to get this right. So they see a large opportunity. But in some markets like the US, we've seen really significant penetration declines in the no-low space. So between 2021 and 2022 in the US, these no-low alternatives penetration decreased 5 percentage points. So it's a pretty significant drop in that market. In Australia, it was sort of predicted to be a big trend at the beginning of 2022 for bartenders. They were saying in the on-premise, this is what we expect in the next 12 months. Interesting as well in that space, and for wine suppliers, is also natural wines is sort of something they're seeing as sort of a new, innovative, trendy sort of emerging category in the wine space as well. But no and low alcohol was sort of predicted to be two of the top sort of trends coming through in the channel. But what we saw at CGA was also, again, a slight decline in penetration in Australia. So 13% of people were drinking no and low alternatives went out in autumn, and then that sort of dropped slightly towards the end of the year. And so it goes back to this piece we were talking to before, that we're starting to see, I guess, a big group of adopters and a big group also of rejectors at sort of two sides of it. I think there's also a value equation that plays into this, where currently the pricing around no low might not be there when you do that versus a cocktail. If it's using no low spirits, the premium that you're paying to go to alcoholic spirits isn't that significant. So I think there's also a value piece to be tackled by brands here. And when we look at the frequency of consumers drinking those no low alternatives, we can see that really clearly in terms of those sort of loyal people that are drinking it almost every time, and that's up significantly. So these are the people who have always looked to moderate or never really liked alcohol to drink when out, and they're going, well, yes, this is what I'm going to drink every time when I go out now, because I was never really that into alcohol, and this is the drink for me. But additionally, the bigger proportion of people, those sort of infrequent, occasionally, sometimes consumers, are saying, no, that's not for me. I've tried it. Either the value equation doesn't make sense, or the taste doesn't make sense for me, or I don't get the value from that product. They're sort of dropping off. So that's where we're seeing a lot of those penetration declines, is sort of the infrequent trialists who are now saying, no, I've tried it. It's not for me. But we're also seeing this in the off-trade as well. So we are a part of NielsenIQ, the largest global consumer research agency, and looking at their sort of 0.0 beer sub-brands in their data, we're seeing exactly the same trend. So overall, less buyers, reduced penetration, but an increase in terms of the number of occasions for those buyers that are still in the category, and also the number of units per occasion. So those people who are loving it, those loyal consumers, are saying, I'm going to drink it more often, I'm going to purchase it more in every transaction I do. But I think it goes back to a sort of more underlying trend of what's happening here in Australia, and that's really a health and well-being trend. And I think there are more other ways to abstain, more than just abstaining, in terms of how to moderate and drink healthier. And actually what people say is, rather than drinking the no-low alternatives, they've probably cut down the amount of alcohol in their sessions, or they've they cut down the amount of alcohol they drink in a week. And that seems to be the main ways they moderate. There are this group of people who've tried it as sort of an alternative to having alcoholic drinks. But then there's also people who are looking at health options from a calorie content perspective as well. And we start to see that come through a lot more in something like hard seltzers that really call out those health cues from a calorie perspective. And they've seen quite a lot of growth in the last couple of years, really led by that US market in Australia. And when you look at their growth relative to no low alcohol options, we're actually seeing a bigger increase in the penetration across hard seltzers relative to no low. So finally, we just want to touch on, I guess, a desire for local. And that means a couple of things. Not only does it mean a desire for products that come from the sort of local areas or the country, but also for sort of a local knowledge or a local experience that can't be offered elsewhere. And Australians are massively parochial, so still wine from Australia really still leads that trend in terms of how they consume wine in the on-premise, followed closely by New Zealand and then further down the list by France, Italy, and Spain. But it really shows how much people in Australia preference Australian wines. And across the markets in the world, we see a really strong desire for local preference in Australia, much higher than the global average of 23%. And there's always been this sort of Australian pride around, you know, Australian made, and that desire therefore to drink local as well is really strong. But more than that, we see this big difference in Australia around that local experience and where they consume drinks as well. So not only do they want products from Australia, they want to drink it in sort of a more localized way. And I think some of that is down to the kind of places we go out and consume drinks in the on-premise in Australia versus the rest of the world. And here you can see versus the global average, where a big proportion of people globally go out in city centres. In Australia, it's much more of a suburban experience. You know, it's about the local pub, RSL, restaurant, or, you know, casual dining option where people choose to consume drinks in the on-premise. So I think this is a really unique insight to Australia and how people consume drinks here. And we can also see brands really trying to dial into this from both directions. And I think a really great example, similar to sort of like craft breweries in sort of inner city areas, are things like this urban winery in Sydney. So not only are they sort of talking up the fact that from a brand perspective, they're producing wine really locally, it's also that local experience that makes it really easy to get to and nuanced, and gives them an additional factor for sort of people coming in to trial and taste sort of different and new products as well. So that's it from us. That's the sort of last piece around localization. But we did have some key takeaways on things that brands can do to really win in the on-premise. And the first of that is really a clear channel strategy. Now, in the on-premise, we've seen a lot of growth and a really strong return since COVID. So it's a great opportunity for suppliers to be able to win in the short run. But, you know, with cost of living concerns that Tom really talked about, you know, what is the right approach from a value or quality perspective? And I think there's really an opportunity to win at both ends of the market. You know, we saw the Dom Perignon activation at that super premium level, but Bagnums as well at a more value approach, being something that really means both types of strategies can win. But I think the piece is to be really clear on what that is. And therefore, having a great understanding of your consumer is essential in the on-premise to win. So therefore, you know, do you have a really coherent understanding of one, your customer, who they are? You know, what are you doing from a commercial planning perspective and a sales function? Do you know the types of venues that you're going out to target and the clear channels that you're targeting through? So I think distribution based on that information we know about localized strategy in the on-premise as well, which I think is pretty well understood in the wine category. You really need to understand that. How do you focus on that localized strategy with your brands as well? The next one is, I think it's a great opportunity to invest in the on-premise right now from a drink supply perspective, but you really need to be wise about the choices you're making. You know, brands in this resurgent on-premise can really be won and made, but they can also make mistakes and lose out if you're not quite clear on that previous point around, you know, your clear strategy and where to invest. You know, understanding of what else is influencing consumers on the path to purchase is essential as well. So where within that journey into the on-premise do you invest money? Is it in the pre-purchase stage with booking venues or deciding on where to visit? Or is it as you get into venue and those touch points or price and promotion? Or is it finally that advocacy piece? And we looked at how cocktails so well are able to create a social moment or that really sort of interesting experience that people are willing to share on social media. It's a really interesting point for how does wine offer that same experience or elevate that experience for people to be able to create that loyalty and advocacy that I guess cocktails are doing so well at the moment in the market with. You know, really understand, you know, how to support or who are the right customers to support to help drive footfall and average rate of sale and increase spend per visit. So how do you find out the right channels to invest in or the right people or right operators to where you kind of work with them on your terms, and also how you work on distribution. And finally, the last one that we do a lot of is, you know, understanding how the market sort of changed and therefore understanding a clear targeting strategy through your CRM, cleaning and resegmenting and based on the new lay of the land here in Australia. And finally, the last one I would say is really you have to earn trial, loyalty, and advocacy. Really reassessing the category and brand strength of the on-premise consumer is essential, because what we know is so much of that credibility and brand equity is built in this channel, and therefore you really need to understand how to target those consumers more effectively. Finally, who is advocating for your brands in venue? Once again, the cocktail example is really poignant in that there's people out there sort of supporting other categories in social, but are the sort of social moments coming through in wine, and understanding those types of consumers you're trying to target and how to speak to them best through the channels that you own. Finally, education, training, and activations are so important when delivered well in the on-premise. I think training is something that is essential for this sort of new wave of wait staff, bar staff, and sommeliers that are sort of coming into the industry after a big proportion of people went to find new jobs elsewhere. I think there's a lot of examples at the moment of the level of service really changing since the pandemic, but also additionally, new ways of ordering from a digital perspective or payment has really changed that dynamic as well. So if a brand can support this education and training and really elevate that experience, it's a key area for a brand to be able to earn that trial, that loyalty and advocacy as well. So finally, I'll just leave you with a bit around who we are. So we are now part of NielsenIQ, as I kind of mentioned before. They're the global leaders in sort of market research. But what CGA and NielsenIQ can now do is give you a comprehensive view of the Australian liquor consumer. Before CGA entered Australia, it was kind of a blind spot for the rest of the market. So with the other NielsenIQ products, we're able to give you this comprehensive view across off and on trade. CGA specifically, we really cater towards the on-premise solutions from a consumer insights perspective with our Opus product. This is sort of a robust insights tracking behaviour habits and preferences of consumers in the on-premise, and it really allows you to understand your consumer and therefore your brand strategy or your category strategy to then build into sales stories for your teams. Next is sort of our outlet segmentation, or our database of all licenses across Australia, and this allows you to create a size and shape of the on-premise and really focus on how you're targeting different segments, or even right down to the venues across Australia with your field sales team. Moving forward, we're looking to launch 2 key products in Australia, which is our on-premise measurement and our beverage track service. And these are super exciting because they start to track actual sales data in the on-premise and allow us to measure that share of the on-premise across the total market in Australia. These are sort of coming to us at the end of Q1 and throughout Q2. So please stay, keep an ear out for when we launch these, and hopefully there'll be information to support you with that. Finally, we do a lot of also custom research. So if you've got a key need or challenge, we can really support on doing custom briefs for suppliers and really support you in winning in the on-premise. And these come in the form of, consumer segmentation, optimizing your assortment, custom research, path to purchase, and also bartender research. So that's all from us today. If you have any questions and you'd like to reach out to us outside of this, our details are there. But thank you so much for your time today. And I think now we're going over to a Q&A as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, James and Tom, for your wonderful insights into on-premise. And it's certainly great to get some of those stats post-COVID. And, I noticed a lot of the data was coming from that last 12 months of 2022. And I know would certainly be interested to see what that's all looking like in 12 months' time, because already I feel like 23, everyone's in a different mindset and really, really keen to get out there and just live normally again. But enough from me. We do have a few questions in here. And the first one I'm going to direct to James, and I think it's in reference to maybe some of your earlier slides. What is the formula you use from the data set you have to make these assumptions for whole of on-premise?
Yeah, great. That's a really good question. And we've got a number of methodologies that allow us to get a read on the total on-premise. So today, the one where the first source that we used mainly was sort of our Opus consumer research. Now, this is a consumer survey that happens twice a year. The last one was in September in field in 2022, and we'll do another one in autumn this year. So I think it goes to market in late March, early April. And so that is our first source, and that allows us to give an understanding of what consumers say their penetration within categories are, that frequency of visitation, that spend levels, and that's where we're getting sort of those, I guess, category views on penetration levels. The next source of data for us is where we're really looking to go to the equation or the modeling out to the total universe is through our beverage track sales data and our on-premise measurement. And essentially these both use sort of a base data source, which is point of sale data. And we take a sample of on-premise venues across Australia. I think we're at roughly sort of 3,000 venues and looking to expand that further. But this sample allows us to project the full market in Australia across different channels. And as we expand, it becomes more and more granular in the detail. So it's, yes, a sample-based model that we project over total market. And we use our licensed database to basically map that on-premise, those on-premise sales to the different channels, and then have a better read and calibrate it to that makeup of the market. Now, this methodology is something that's sort of been proven with CGA in the UK originally, but also in the US, which is a much bigger and more fragmented market. It's a really established product over there, the measurement side of things, and also a number of markets in Europe as well. And Australia is sort of next on the list to be able to launch this service. The one thing I would say is in wine, we're actually not looking to launch this year straight away into the measurement side of things, just because of the fragmented nature of it. So that's something we'll look to develop along the line. Okay. But we will get sales data from a beverage track perspective. So that's before you model it out for market. Sorry, very long explanation of our data sources, but we have a few. Yeah.
I hope that answers your question, John.
Yeah. If he has more, I'm happy to sort of answer them via an email or take you through our approach. Yeah.
Wonderful. And another more data orientated question. Could you share how you segment on-premise?
Yes, totally. Look, we don't have it in this presentation, but we're happy to sort of send a follow-up on how we segment it. We've got sort of a primary segmentation, which covers off sort of, most of the general channels you'd understand. And you probably would have seen a few of those primary channels in the slides from our consumer research. Things like pubs, casual dining, restaurants, bars, things like that. And then we do sub-channels below that as well. So you can start to get into more nuances around, okay, what does an RSL sports club actually mean? Is it a bowling club? Is it a surf lifesaving club? Things like that. So we do have that level of segmentation in there as well.
In a 45-minute presentation, there's only so much we can cover.
Yeah. We also do segment from occasions perspective as well as channels as well. So, you can see that view at the same time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. With reference to the term local, i.e. local wine, how do you define local? Do you mean all domestic wine or within a reasonable distance from a venue, i.e. Hunter Valley to Sydney rather than Coonawarra to Sydney?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because we ask this to consumers, it's their perception of local. So what we start to break down as we get into our sort of sales measurement is looking at more from a state level initially, but also the differences between metro and regional areas as well. So we do, I think with that consumer data, we were looking at those different sort of regional types being sort of city centres or suburban areas or rural areas as well. And that's sort of where we're sort of defining those localizations. We hadn't broken it by state, but we can do that data as well. As we get more detailed sales data, we can start to drill down to sort of group up areas or group up venues within that area and start to provide that information back about what's happening there. But local for a consumer can mean a lot of things. When we're talking about the wines specifically, we've only really referred to it as a national level. So that first slide was all around Australian wines rather than sort of further afield.
Yeah, you haven't honed it down to regionality level of local. It's more the geographical location in distance. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's how consumers sort of define that. Tom, you might be able to help me with this on have we added in any sort of wine regions as part of the latest update?
Extra layer. Hang on, you're mute.
Yeah, we are certainly looking at that deeper lens into wine, but there's no plans at the moment to look at the regions. But we're always taking on feedback from clients and the market to what's most important. So it's definitely something that we can kind of look at and consider. But yeah, we haven't done anything on the region specific.
Regionality.
Yeah. And so the part of our partnership with Wine Australia is really to kind of develop those insights that are more catered to the Australian industry. Right. I'm Australian, obviously, but our business is from the UK originally. So we're looking for building out our insights to make them better quality and more useful for suppliers. So that's really good feedback for us around that sort of regional aspect of wines.
Fantastic. Thank you. Next question is, how many wine varieties are captured in the data? i.e. what varietals register beyond the top 10? Or did you just focus in, I guess, on, those 10 varietals?
It's really another good one for Tom. Do you have an understanding of that?
Yeah, so we've got 30 in the list at the moment. So 30 of the biggest ones that we see as the biggest. And then we ask the consumers the question, which ones do you drink? So yeah, and then we just included the top 10. Yeah, but there's 30 in total that we asked them about, and then that slide was just the top 10 percentages.
Yeah, a nice snapshot.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are limitations once you get below that with sample numbers with sort of really unique varietals. So that's just the one sort of limitation of it.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I think unless anyone else wants to quickly type in another question, I think we'll wrap up Q&A for today. And thank you again, Tom and James, for your time and insights into what CGA are able to provide to the Australian beverage, and I guess for today specifically the wine industry. And we look forward to seeing more to come in that space from you guys. For our regular webinar watchers, our next webinar will be held on Tuesday, the 7th of March. We are just finalising details for that, so keep an eye out on WCA social media and also our e-news. For our WCA members, all recordings from today's and previous webinars are all stored on the website, so have a browse through. If you've got some spare moments, it's saved under the education section. And if you have any suggestions on topics you would like us to cover in the program this year, please email me directly, Prue Klein, it's wcA@winecommunicators.com.au. Thanks again, everyone, for attending, and happy Valentine's Day. Hope you've got something nice planned this evening. Thank you.